Right, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start by asking each of my panelists to introduce themselves. We've had quite a few lineup changes on this panel for reasons that we won't go into just yet. But Nathan, do you want to kick us off and just give us a quick overview of who you are, what you do, and what you're looking forward to at the conference?
Sure. My name is Nathan Gill. I'm the head of product and solutions for Verifone Europe. Verifone is one of the largest providers of payment solutions. We've got 30 million payment devices in 150 countries around the world. We're very excited to be here and participate in this conversation. Obviously, security is top of mind for all of the millions of merchants and acquirers and banks that we service. And so it's something that's ingrained in our business model.
Brilliant. Nuno?
So I'm Nuno Sebastiao. I'm founder and CEO at Feedzai. At Feedzai, we're basically the leader of a new generation of AI-first machine learning fraud prevention technologies working. I think what's unique about us is working from the fintech side all the way to the merchant side, and for the first time bringing all those two data sets and data points together of, as a consumer, who do you buy from and who do you hold your savings with?
Great. And last but not least, Scott.
Good morning. My name is Scott Rose. I'm head of product at Pindrop. Pindrop tries to provide security, identity, and trust for all voice interactions, and we're one of the leading software providers for the financial services industry for both fraud and authentication in the phone channel.
Brilliant. So let's start by setting the scene a little bit here. This panel is entitled Saying Goodbye to Passwords and Pins. So let's start off by getting your impressions on why are passwords and pins disappearing? What's replacing them and what's driving that trend? Who wants to go first?
I'll have a go.
You go.
So it's quite simple. It's all about consumer experience, right? I mean, when I'm buying something, when I'm interacting with the system, I want it to be as seamless as I can. And if we put things like second-factor authentication and things like, passwords, pins that we have to remember, especially when you're typing them in a small device, that's going to create friction, that creates abandonment. And quite frankly, technically, it's old technology. It's not the best way to understand who you are as a consumer. There's far better signals out there, ranging from behavioral to your history, your interactions, that are a lot more credible at making us understand, is it you who really you're claiming to be? So just old technology that creates a lot of friction, very simple.
Passwords, they're trying to strike the balance between convenience and security, and most people are going with convenience today. We all reuse our passwords. We might use a small, minor modification, but in essence, all of our services are basically protected by the same password. Once that password is compromised, literally all your services can be accessed.
Yeah, I think from a payments perspective and thinking about in-store payments, the evolution's been interesting, right? The first form of electronic payment occurred with a card that didn't require any other authentication. As long as you had that card, you could get your payment accepted. After that, it was signature. So you needed the card and signature, and that was the new form of authentication. And now, obviously, we've moved to PIN. And in each case, there was an evolution of the security around the authentication, and it was really risk of fraud that was oftentimes driving the new form of authentication. I think we see lots of new forms of authentication. I think the thing that's a little bit different now is, one, they're all digital. There's no more signatures involved. But two, you're getting a lot more for that. I think what we're seeing is that, as you move to an app-based model of paying for things and using biometrics, for instance, to authenticate, you can achieve a lot more than just payment. You can actually incorporate loyalty and a lot of other services into that transaction. So the value to the consumer, it's not just necessarily a new, better, more secure way to authenticate. You actually can get more as part of the transaction, which we think is good.
So if I pick up there a little bit on what you said about more secure, so I think we're all in agreement that consumers are demanding more convenient ways of authenticating their payments, but is it always more secure, or is this actually creating more opportunities for fraud? Is this opening up new types of fraud? In my experience, the fraudsters are as advanced, if not more advanced, with the technology than the merchants or the people, instigating these new technologies. What new types of fraud are we seeing?
I can have a go. So it's clearly that they're as good as we are from a technical standpoint, and what we've seen is there's a shift. No one's stealing a credit card anymore, or that still, but that's not where fraud happening. Fraud happening, very sophisticated, concerted, things like bot attacks, where we see, all of a sudden it's 9 a.m. on a Saturday, and one of the largest retailers on the world starts to be what are seemingly, if you look at all this in separate ways, valid transactions. But if you look at them as an aggregate, you see that it's a massive bot attack distributed throughout the world, happening at the same time, commanded, being controlled from a central place. Or things like someone hacking into a financial institution and actually disconnecting the risk systems, or changing the risk systems themselves so that the risk systems say everything's good. That's a lot more sophisticated than what it used to be. And from our experience, that's what we're seeing out there. And it's massive, because with one, in a faraway place in the world, remotely, you can hack into these systems, change, and then move money or move goods without people even seeing it.
I think you should think about fraudsters being always a step ahead. They're going to be creative, which means any security provision we lay down, they're going to be able to crack it. And in order to protect against that, you need to have a multi-factor approach. If you think that that one security provision is going to lock things down, they'll figure that out, and they'll find an end around, whether it's through social engineering, reconnaissance, credential stuffing, they will find a way. So you must provide for multiple levels of protection in case that one layer does get compromised.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've mentioned a few different types of authentication there. We've talked about biometrics. I mean, one that I think is of particular interest to you, Scott, is voice authentication as well. Yep. And we've seen some of the big banks certainly implement this technology, which is supposed to recognize me by my voice, don't even have to ask me for my password, my PIN, yep, my mother's maiden name, my first pet, whatever it happens to be. All of them, sometimes, in my experience. Is that something that you've seen fraudsters attacking as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So now that biometrics and the technologies behind it are advancing, that is a valid new measure for providing security, either as an addition to passwords or as a complete replacement. But now, because that technology is advancing, the ability to synthesize voices and to masquerade as someone else, or to simply be able to replay those prescribed text phrases that some of the voice-based authentication solutions out there are asking for, that's provided yet another, almost literally open door to get into people's services. So, while voice is an absolute secure way to provide a new level of authentication, it needs to be text independent, it needs to be channel independent, it needs to be real time, it needs to be passive. You ask for a prescribed phrase, and how easy is that going to be to go replicate and recreate and be used nefariously?
And I think you could show us that, is that correct?
Yeah, so I've got a little demonstration here to basically show how easy it is to set up a statement or to pretend as if you're someone else. So there's companies out there for positive reasons, obviously, for productive reasons, that have built technology and have automatic speech recognition, natural language processing that allows for text to be created into statements and played back. There's a company out there called Lyrebird. Adobe actually got into this market a few years ago with a product called Voco, which was intended to optimize post-production work. They never quite productized that. But here at Pindrop, our product and our MO is to provide authentication and fraud protection. So we built our own synthesizer, which basically shows how easy it is to take audio, literally from any source, off the internet, from YouTube, anywhere, use that audio to basically create a model of a voice through machine learning, and then have that voice say anything you want. So that's what this synthesizer is right here. At least we had it a second ago. If we can bring that right back up. Oh. And here's our password.
Somebody's recording that now, you
Yep.
can tell.
Okay, so I've got a couple tabs open here. I've put some sentences in here early, but we'll show.
Oh, tech team's on the stage.
Yep.
That's always a good sign. Just
So,
talk amongst yourselves. We'll turn it off, turn it back on again.
So
Plug
we'll
it
show
back
this
in.
working here, and then to show how this is not canned, I'm going to have anyone tell me any other statement to make. So we have this synthesizer. It's up at voicespoof.com. We have a number of voices that are modeled in this service. So we've got Trump basically making a couple statements here. So let's go ahead and play it.
I tried to attend the MoneyConf event in Dublin, but they would not let me in.
Okay, so he didn't say that, obviously. All we've done is taken audio off the internet, created a model of his voice, and made those statements. So just a couple other amusing statements to make here.
We thought Killian Martin was leaving, but we can't get rid of him.
So it nicely replicates his intonations. I mean, everyone can sort of sense that it's him. There might be a subtle mechanical element that we can all detect, but this is certainly good enough to get past a lot of voice-based authentication systems, specifically ones that ask for prescribed phrases. So here's Obama.
Deep down inside, I genuinely support Trump's policies.
Right. So we can think of like, fake news, and I mean, we're doing this for fun and for laughs, but this can start to be used in a pretty crazy way. So let me go ahead and, since Trump seems to be the selection of choice these days, and by the way, when we were at the RSA conference in San Francisco about a month and a half ago, we had people come up and and just do whatever they wanted. Of course, Trump was the most popular selected voice, and we probably got about 20 minutes of audio off this. So I think we're going to basically grab that, put that all together into a single speech and play that. So I thought I'd say something here. So based on the success from this summit in Singapore, I will make Kim my new press secretary.
This is going to come back and haunt us. I can just feel it. Nobody's dragged me off the stage yet.
Okay, so nothing's canned here. So our service is going to go and render this statement. So it's going to run. It'll take about maybe 10 or 12 seconds or so. And this is where the demo gremlins, of course, are just waiting to bite. My colleagues here are saying, man, I'm glad you're taking the risk and not me. There we go.
Based on the success from the summit in Singapore, I will make him my new press secretary.
Got my misspelling there too, but you get the whole point. And then one last thing, the scores down here, which I didn't show, this is showing our engines analyzing the voice. And what you're basically seeing here is an indication of how high quality the voice sounds. If this was a low quality audio production, this number would be lower. This is a logarithmic scale. But at the same time, we are also detecting whether we think the voice is synthesized. So this shows it's a very high indication of a synthesized voice. Google Duplex, who presented their technologies a couple weeks ago, did such an amazing service that they demoed. But when we detected that, we detected it as a synth, just on the positive side, but it shows how good this technology is getting.
Thank you very much for that. So, and as somebody who records a lot of podcasts, I'm quite terrified about what you could do with my voice. So, you spent the last 5 years building up this library of all these different anomalies to detect, where it's a natural speech pattern, where it isn't. But at the end of the day, you still, I imagine, the technology alone is not enough. You still need people to, so you're saying everybody in this room could detect that probably wasn't quite natural, whereas technology could. So right. I think what we're looking at here maybe is that whilst technology to both commit and detect fraud is advancing, we're not there yet, right? We still need people to prevent and detect those fraud systems.
Absolutely.
And how do you go about doing that? Do you train call center agents?
Yeah.
Do you replace call center agents? What do you do there?
Yeah, well, two things. I mean, the technology itself, most technologies of this sort are moving over to AI and machine learning driven processes, and those have to be trained. And some of that training is still done manually. Some of that is becoming more and more automated. So just the element of training ML-based models could be manually intensive. But from a fraud standpoint, while we detect fraud and it's being shown automatically in our dashboards, there's still agents. There's still fraud agents that are taking our indicators, looking at those, creating cases off those, and going through their own analysis and determining, is this identified call or is this identified voice someone who's fraudulent? And the more and more accurate you get, where when you fire up a fraud situation and that agent verifies it, these are review rates, these are statistics that companies go through, and it's quite a process. And so the in-person element is still very much there.
I mean, and Nuno, I know that your technology detects more than just voice fraud. You do a whole spectrum, use AI to detect a whole spectrum of different types of fraud. Do you agree with that? Do you still need a human element within that as well?
Yeah, totally. And I get a feeling that is also I think technology-wise, we might have gone a little bit, and I'll use another the analogy you're saying about, people keep on asking for your maiden name, your pet's name, and whatnot, and that's us trying to conform humans to technology. I think what I see now is a little bit more in the middle ground, and there are other industries where you can use an analogy. I mean, Tesla tried to do that just by fully automating their factories, and now they're going backward and putting more humans in the loop because there's a certain particular type of tasks that you just don't automate well, be it with AI, be it with robots, be it with whatever. And it's not about that you could not do it with AI or with a robot, but it's just so complex and so changing that it's probably not worth it, and you don't get the best experience. So what we see as a company that detects fraud, taking signals such as Pindrop or others across all the different channels, there's always going to be cases where, from an experience perspective, the best experience you can give to a person is if someone picks up the phone, is well informed of what the scenario is. You try to call via the call center, then you try to log into the app, and has a dialogue with that person. Yes, chatbots can go a long way there, but there's always, in our experience, cases where if you put customer experience first, you need that element in the loop. Now, what it's going to be used is not for the mundane tasks, which is what we were using people for until now. It's going to be for the added value type of stuff. And we see that in the organizations we work with, across the globe, more and more of that happening is they realize that they have all these people now free to put on these high-value things. And this creates a lot of value for them, regardless of what channel you're using to communicate with your app or your financial institution.
So it's interesting there you pointed out that, people will interact, they will pay in many different ways, whether that's a card, a phone, and they'll have many different authentication methods there. Nathan, you have to provide whatever payment systems people want to use. How do you join up those dots? How do you make sure that you can detect fraud, whether somebody's using their Apple Pay, their card? You were saying earlier it used to just be a card and that was fine, but now you've got all these different methods. How do you go about approaching that problem?
Yeah, I think there's two ways that we provide that. The first is we need to make sure that we're able to accept these new forms of payment in a secure way. And what we're seeing happening, especially as a result of things like PSD2 and that sort of thing, the number of ways that you can pay is increasing dramatically. And it used to be that we would have to write a hard-coded payment application that would accept Visa, MasterCard, Amex, maybe a few other international schemes, and get that certified by the networks and also by acquirers. And eventually, after a 6-month process, we could bring something to market. Unfortunately, that approach doesn't work because things are innovating at a much faster pace. So we've had to, for the first time, and this is a scary word for a lot of people in the payment space, but start to open up our devices so that we can have third parties develop new ways to pay in a secure environment and make those new ways to pay available on our devices in a much shorter time frame than 3 to 6 months. And so that's required us to think differently about how we architect our hardware so that we have a secure environment that's distinct and different from where these other third-party applications run. That's on the acceptance side, and I think we're seeing a lot of progress there. But then to get at the second part of your question, once you enable the acceptance and you're processing that transaction, how do you ensure that you're filtering out as much fraud as possible? And I think, for us and a lot of our customers, it comes down to data. The more data you have, the better able you are to filter out fraudulent transactions. And as we've seen the amount of data that we have grow and multiply, we found that our ability and our customers' ability to rank risk and make real-time decisions on transaction approvals has continued to increase. So I think the winners here are going to be whoever has access to the most data.
Did you want to comment on that?
I totally agree with that. And one of the things with data is there's also, the challenge with it sometimes is there's so much of it that on talking about, open banking and open APIs, you don't know what are the new data forms that are going to actually provide what's called a lift on your models for you to do a better job. And what we've also seen is actually depends on the regions. So if you want to build, really a solution that helps that, you have to have a mechanism that built on machine learning really is built for, I don't know what's the next data set I'm going to get. I don't know what kind of format is going to be. I don't know what kind of channel it's going to be from. But what I do know is for me to have the best possible portrait of someone, a financial institution or a person or a company, I do need all of that to come in as opposed to what was done before, which are fairly static data sets. And only the companies that can tolerate that and can do that, because as you're saying, I have no idea what the next payment methodology is going to be. Only the companies that build that and have their AI systems and their models continuously iterating on new data sets can and will be there in the future, in my view. Yeah.
There's also there's an interesting element here when fraud is identified, and whether this is done by the vendor or actually done by, let's say, the bank or the insurance company, that information wants to be shared. I mean, it wants to be put into, say, a consortium, so then that can be used for other potential attacks. So it'll be interesting to see how things like GDPR and the disability to share information is going to impact things like consortiums, where the organizations want to be protected by experiences from their peers in the market. To better and fast track incoming threats. So these are kind of at odds with one another. It'll be interesting to see how that materializes.
On that, and if I may, I mean, what we have seen, and this might be sometimes a little bit of a contrarian thing, is the best combinations, particularly taking into account GDPR in Europe, is when you have these public data sources, behavioral, device, geo, and whatnot, but also then for each organization, combine those that are public level with their data that is only theirs and they cannot distribute to third parties because of the GDPR type of reasons. And what we've seen out there is by combining these two kind of data sets, so the external one that is publicly available with the data that you have as an organization, that you're not able to then share things like account information, historical information of your customers if they allow you to do that, then you actually have probably the best of both worlds, keep making sure of privacy concerns while leveraging publicly available data sets. I believe strongly that the day where everything's going to be publicly shared, more and more so specifically because what we've seen, with the elections being swayed and whatnot, it's probably going to diminish all of those deep, rich data sets being available, and it's going to be for the companies that are able to figure out the combination of the two data sets that will provide probably the best results out there.
I mean, interestingly, you just talked about, what the companies are going to do with the data and how they're going to hold it, but also we're talking about this new means of payment. How comfortable are consumers going to feel? So if we're talking about voice, voice authentication, Alexa, buy me pet food, that's a common one now, isn't it? Do we think we're going to see a change in customers' attitude to this? Because as far as I'm aware right now, it's mostly only early adopters who are using that kind of payment mechanism. Do you think that all these questions around data and scares around hacks are going to change customers' attitudes to new payment systems, and they're going to pull back to cash or gold or bartering? Or do you think we're still going to see this evolution of new payment systems, so long as the companies keep up with the fraud problems?
I mean, I think the bar continues to go higher, and the expectations are that these new kinds of interfaces need to be secure. And maybe they don't use them for those kinds of transactions. They might do just casual queries, get me my calendar, bring up the weather, et cetera. But they're going to want to be able to do ever greater and ever higher value transactions. So they're going to be expecting the technology, whether it's from a software standpoint, from a cloud standpoint, from a software standpoint, that these types of interfaces are secure. And if they're not, they're going to go to a competition that provides that.
I think there's been a lot of research on this, right? And oftentimes it can depend on the demographic. I was in Spain the other week, and I was in a store, and I was standing behind an older woman who had her card, and she inserted it in the machine, and then she handed over a note to the cashier, and it had her PIN on it, and she wanted the cashier to enter the PIN in, right? So I think, there are going to be certain segments that are really open to adopting new forms of payment, and I think that it comes down to what is the benefit to me as a consumer. I think if you just look at Apple Pay and Google Pay, for example, most would agree it's a pretty frictionless experience, but so is tapping your card on a contactless payment device. And so the question is, why is it where we have a new way of paying via an app that's pretty frictionless, why are we still not seeing massive amounts of adoption? And I think the answer is probably, the value for the consumer isn't quite there yet. And if Apple and Google can start incorporating these the removal of these plastic loyalty cards and integrate that into the payment process and know with a single tap, not only can I pay for my goods, but I can accumulate the loyalty points and or spend those points. Now we're starting to see the value proposition increase, and so I think ultimately that's going to be the driver of it. Any of these, the consumer needs to see enough value, and they'll overlook some of their concerns about security.
Yeah, so actually it sounds like what we've agreed here is that the consumers aren't that bothered by security. It's more about what's the easiest way for them to do whatever it is they want to do. It's all on you guys to figure out the security, right? Yeah. You guys have to work out, what's next after pins and passwords. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to my panel for joining me here today. Thank you so much for joining us in this session. And I welcome back to the stage our wonderful MC.